Hey. Parashat Vayakhel Pekudei. This week's portion of the week, 2 parashiyot. And it's extremely exciting. We're coming up to the end of Sefer Shemot. We're leading up to the peak. We're building the Mishkan. We're actually building after weeks and weeks of learning about the Mishkan, learning the ins and outs, the exterior and the interior of how and why and the details. We're actually doing it in our parashiyot, Vayakhel Pekudei. Now, I wanted to discuss specifically the connection between Parashat Kitisa and our parashiyot, Vayakhel Pekudei. Often in commentary, when we try and find meaning, we try and understand the sequence of certain parashiyot and how they follow one another and what's the meaning that we should be reading into. So last week's parasha was a pretty devastating one. It was really, in essence, as a nation, it was our first sin. The golden calf, we sinned with Chet HaEgel right after Ma'amad Har Sinai. 40 days later, we got nervous and we built the golden calf. We built Chet HaEgel. That's the first sin as a nation. Am Yisrael comes out of Egypt, formulating itself as a nation, and this is our first sin as a nation. Now, this concept of a Yetzer Hara for Avodah Zarah is something that I want us to try and have a little bit more understanding towards in terms of the history of it. Today, when we think about Avodah Zarah, it's something extremely foreign to us. It's something almost that we can't really relate to because we don't understand it. If we look around, how many of us are interested or even, think it would be something of a choice to bow down or to idealize an inanimate object? It's not something within our reach. We don't even know people that worship things that are not alive, even people. We don't really have that phenomena around us. There are some tribes in the world, but really just not the majority. So the concept of Avodah Zarah doesn't exist in our world today. So we have to understand, if we compare ourselves, our generation, to that generation, this concept, the concept of the Yetzer Hara, the desire, and we definitely deal with Yetzer Hara, but we just don't have the Yetzer Hara for Avodah Zarah, we have to understand a little bit about it. Now, when you look historically, you look at the timeline and you ask yourself, when did Avodah Zarah stop becoming a Yetzer for Am Yisrael, but also worldwide? When did it cease to exist? And the Gra speaks about it, and he says that there was something, there's a little bit of comment, machloket in terms of when exactly it happened. The truth is, it happened very much in correlation with the same time period that Nevuah ceased to exist in the world. Now, Nevuah, there's different opinions as to when exactly it stopped. Some people say in the early or mid 400s before the count, and others, most kind of agree with the Rihal, Rabbi Yehuda Halevi, that says that really it was 40 years after the second Beis HaMikdash. And most agree that it was after the declaration of Koresh's declaration. So this is 40 years after that, and that's when Nevuah ceased to exist, which is really, in calculation, about 1,000 years after Yetziat Mitzrayim. That's when Nevuah ceased to exist, and we kind of entered into a new era of Chokhmah and so on. But just in terms of this subject, the Gra explains that in order for the negative mystical forces in the world that came with witchery or some form of evil magic, and Avodah Zarah, the desire to worship still objects, that whole world had to come with kind of like the decrease of another world that counters this world of prophecy and superb and extraordinary miracles. And those two things kind of disappeared and fizzled out from the world, historically speaking, not only in the Jewish nation, but also worldwide. We don't have supernatural miracles anymore. We don't have prophets walking around. And that kind of, in year 312 BC, that kind of like fizzled out of the world. So now we're talking about, right after Har Sinai, this is in the midst of the existence of this desire in the world. So we have to understand where they're coming from. When we ask the simple question of, what's Am Yisrael doing? They just stood at Har Sinai, they saw, they felt, they smelt, they experienced God, and then literally 40 days later, they doubted it. How could that even be? So we have to understand that the strong force of the desire to worship something that's practically standing before you was larger than life, larger than anything we could understand. But they definitely regretted. They regretted, their awful sin. And here comes the connection between Parashat Ki Tisa and Vayakhel Pekudei. So Vayakhel Pekudei, the main topics that we discuss are Shabbos and the Mishkan. Both have many, many details. And this comes right after the story of Chet HaEgel. And I wanted to try and think of the connection between the two. So when you think of someone who sins, when you think of someone who makes a mistake, many commentators explain that the biggest punishment for someone who sins is the knowledge of the knowledge of the sin itself. The person feels such regret and remorse and sadness that he sins, that he gets into this really inner place of darkness, that he feels so bad about himself, such guilt that really prevents him from really trying to get himself out of it. And that's the biggest punishment one could get, that he himself feels far from Hashem, not because Hashem is necessarily far, but because he feels that he can't even look at Hashem anymore. And this is what's happening to Am Yisrael. Am Yisrael is so enwrapped in their guilt and their disappointment in themselves, in the knowledge that they failed. They failed big time. And you could look at these parashiot as a nechama. So these two parashiot that HaKadosh Baruch Hu and Moshe Rabbeinu are teaching Am Yisrael right after the sin are something that we could learn a lifelong lesson from as well. And of course, this doesn't deny the fact that Moshe and of course HaKadosh Baruch Hu were extremely disappointed, in fact furious, in fact doubted the whole existence of the chosen nation. But even so, Hashem understood and Hashem forgave, and Hashem obviously committed to continuing with this nation as a nation, and he didn't give up on them. So when I look at these parashiot, I feel that they are parashiot of Nechama. And let's see why. When you look at Shabbos, the mitzvah of Shabbos, there's much to learn from Shabbos. But on a simple level, Shabbos is all about connection. When you look at our lives today, each one of us is extremely busy in a family. The parents, they go to work individually. Whatever they do, they're extremely focused in whatever they're doing. Their children have work, schoolwork, they have homework. They're extremely, focused on their own friends, their games, everything they're doing. And yes, we have meals during the week, please God, Baruch Hashem, but Shabbos is nothing. There's no other distractions. We're at home, no phones, no movies, no, friends around. It's just us. It's just a Shabbos meal. It's Torah. It's Yiddishkeit. It's HaKadosh Baruch Hu. You sit around the table and there's really that moment of real connection. And then in normal circumstances, in normal years, and please God, it's getting to be that way more and more so, please God, with reference to the whole entire world from our coronavirus, please God. We go to shul and we see our communities and we communicate with our communities. So really, in essence, Shabbos is all about connection to our Creator, connection to our essence, connection to our community, our family, and our friends. And that within itself gives us a form of rejuvenation, a form of strengthening ourselves towards the week to come, towards everything we're about, gives us that strength, and we're ready for the next. Now the Mishkan We've learned so much about the Mishkan, but the difference in our parashiot, that the Mishkan isn't only in theory. This is really the stage where Am Yisrael actually formalizes it into action. It brings it forth, and they build the Beis HaMikdash. They're immersed in literally building the Beis HaMikdash. And this connected very well to something that my husband says. So my husband, bless his soul, has many little Torahs that are huge, huge Torahs. And one of his little things that he does is that he often asks people how they do. How do you do? And the simple answer to how do you do is, I'm doing well, thank God, I'm okay, I'm feeling okay. How do you do? I'm doing well. But he's asking a deeper question. How do you do? How does someone do? How does someone create when he doesn't feel like creating? How does someone do? How does someone shift emotionally, mentally, spiritually, physically? How does someone move? And the answer to his question that he's looking for is, how do you do? You do. So someone asks, how do you do? I do. Because the secret is, it's not about what you end up doing. It's about being in the process of doing. So when you're not sure and when you lack the energy, even if you're not in it completely, the first step and the next step and the step after that, that creates a doing, that creates a creation. So when he asks, how do you do? He's looking for you to understand that you just have to do. Whatever it is, the smallest of details, the smallest of things, you just have to do. And when you look historically at the time period of the whole Midbar, throughout the Midbar, Am Yisrael is complaining. They're either missing Mitzrayim, Egypt, even though they were, immersed in slavery, immersed in, the biggest levels of torture. They miss it. They complain about water. They complain about food. They complain about, comfort, and so on and so on. And during this time period of building the Beit HaMikdash, we don't hear any complaining. We don't hear any tlunot from Am Yisrael. They're so involved in doing, and in doing something that is fulfilling, something that they know that is bigger than them, something that they know that is greater than them. So it's not just any type of doing, it's doing good. It's doing something for the greater good. And that in itself is a huge nechama for Am Yisrael to move forward, to move through whatever it was that they feel and that they know as mistakes, to move through that and to move forward. So Be'ezrat Hashem, we should merit to know this, to feel this, and to understand this, both on the people around us, but also on ourselves. If we, chas v'shalom, stray away, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is constantly hugging us with nechama and wanting us back and giving us maybe the tools for it. So specifically this week is a very, very special week for myself and my family. My oldest son, Oritan Yehuda, is bar mitzvah, and he's reading the Parshat Vayakhel Pekudei HaChodesh. And it's a very, very exciting and extremely emotional stage of life. I myself am the oldest of 4 girls, and we didn't have a boy in the family, but I have been to bar mitzvahs and I've heard the speeches. But you can't compare the experience to when you yourself enter that phase in life. And I just wanted to speak or share just these 2 points that I've noticed. We had the Hanachat Tefillin about a month ago, the first stage towards the whole process of the bar mitzvah, the ownership of the mitzvahs. And I was looking at Oritan, and a few months ago, my Oritan and Yair started learning tefillin. Rav Rimon has this beautiful book about tefillin. It discusses the halachot, the conceptual, kind of like spiritual, hashkafic understanding behind the concepts and the rituals. And it was a beautiful thing to observe and watch. They were learning and discussing. But the peak of that, that experience was really watching Oritan for the very, very first time trying on his tefillin. And the whole process of tefillin and the talit was really, really a wonderful, beautiful process of both, the family, like our core family being involved, and the grandparents from both sides who joined in to the process of buying the tefillin and working towards it, and the talit bag. Everything was in detail, like, mindful details, and extremely, extremely kind of like embracing experience for my son and for us as well. And I saw him, tying on the tefillin for the first time, and every little stage he was so excited, and he said, Abba, this is like what this was talking about, and this is the small, and then yamin, and the inner, and the rosh, and the yad, and he was talking about all the perushim, and he was so excited that it was coming into play, coming into action, coming into the physical form of everything that he's been learning up till now in theory. And you could like mamash feel the excitement in the air. And it brought me back to think about his brit. When you have a baby and you do the brit, Baruch Hashem, you grow up learning that this is one of the first mitzvahs you have with a baby boy. I didn't question it. It was something that we were obviously going to do. But only looking back, you could see that there was very little kind of understanding of what was going on. We didn't know who Oritan was. We barely knew who we were as a family, as a unit, as a home. And we were kind of like bringing Oritan into this covenant with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but we knew very little about the covenant. We knew very little about our binyan, about Oritan. But we did. We kind of joined forces blindly into this kind of companionship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu together with Oritan. But now at this stage of his life with Bar Mitzvah, it was a willful kind of process. It was by choice. It was conscious. It was mindful. But it felt a very similar process of us kind of like together with Oritan stepping into the next stage of commitment, of connection, of understanding. And it was a very emotional and even godly experience to see him having his Hanachat Tefillin for the first time and connecting in that way to our Creator and to our Kadosh Baruch Hu, and to be part of that process is incredible. Yair and many commentators say that, whenever there's details, the more the details, the more parts of it that we can ultimately connect to. So Be'ezrat Hashem, may we continue to have Mazal Tov, all of us, all in our separate areas. Be'ezrat Hashem, may we see and count the blessings that we have in our lives. May we connect to everything on every smallest of details, please God. B'mhera b'yameinu, and may we celebrate as a nation in glory. Amen. Selah. Shabbat Shalom.